Political Science at Hamline University. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, Professor. First of all, I mean, just looking at that report and listening to certainly a lot of what's being said by Republicans, I mean, it feels like a lot of people have forgotten or chosen to forget what happened at the US Capitol building 23 months ago. Do you get that impression as well?
I do get that impression. I think they've also forgotten the fact that there were more than 60 court cases brought after the election 2 years ago, raising questions of voter fraud, including in places like Arizona. And the courts in all 60 cases rejected those arguments, saying that there was no proof being offered to support these claims. But facts don't seem to matter anymore. The idea of stolen elections, the idea that the elections have been rigged, has become almost an ideology, almost a litmus test for the Republican Party at this point. And this becomes dangerous going forward because a democracy requires faith in elections. And that's why, in some sense, this is such a critical election, because we've got to divide over elections in the same way that everything else is divided over in the United States right now.
It does look very likely, doesn't it, that come next week, Donald Trump is going to announce his intention to run in 2024. And we're then going to be looking at a rerun, aren't we, of 2020, except by this time we'll have President Biden, the incumbent, who's 82, and Donald Trump will be 78. I mean, these aren't exactly young, dynamic, energized men, are they?
No, they're not. We're looking at a race at this point which is speaking to maybe one generation of voters. But when I think, for example, to my students, my students look at it and say, these are people that are almost 3 times their age, or at least, at the very least, 2 to 2.5 times. And so they're representing a different generation in American politics. And to a large extent, I suspect we're going to see questions about health being raised in terms of both of them. Already as president, Joe Biden is facing concerns about whether his cognitive capacities are up to where they're supposed to be. And I suspect we're going to get the same with Donald Trump. The long and the short of it is we are looking at a rerun, and we're going to look at, I'll predict for you that after tomorrow, after the American elections are over, we're already racing towards the 2024 elections, with Donald Trump declaring, DeSantis deciding he's going to run from Florida, and American politics is just going to be on steroids for the next 2 years.
In the last couple of days, we've here in Europe been digesting some boasts that came out of Moscow, a man very close to Vladimir Putin, boasting that indeed the Wagner Group and other associates of President Putin's inner circle have been actively involved trying to influence the outcome of the election. Is that a story that's gathered a lot of traction in the United States, given that just 24 hours later everyone's heading to the polls, which they are today?
It's gained some traction, but I think it's going to be a story that really plays out more over the next few days, because if the Republicans win and do well, Democrats are going to say it was because the election was stolen. And if the Republicans wind up losing, there's going to be still nonetheless claims that somehow the elections were not fair, that they were rigged in some way. So Moscow has won this, let's say, war of the words already by planting seeds of doubt in the Americans about the fairness of the elections. But it's a story that I think will grow over the next few days, because still right now, the immediacy of the elections, the immediacy of inflation, of crime, of the economy are really sort of dominating what's going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, America's enemies are clearly loving watching America split down the middle, a deeply polarized country, nothing the like of which I've never seen in my lifetime in the United States. Just moving on, though, lastly, you touched on a couple of the issues at the forefront of voters' minds. Inflation is an issue all over the world, the threat of recession too. But in fact, when you look at the United States economy and the jobs figures that came out in the last couple of days, I mean, there's actually not a lot to be too unhappy about, is there?
You're absolutely correct. We're still looking at an overall national unemployment rate of about 3%. We're looking at the inflation rate compared to Europe, fairly mild at what, about 6 to 7, 8%. And wages are going up at a rate that we haven't seen in at least a generation. In many ways, the U.S. economy is doing exceedingly well. The dollar is strong, but nonetheless, there is this fear because a fear about what's going to happen. But more importantly, I think there is this pocketbook aspect to it, that when people go and fill up their gas tank, when they go to the grocery store, they're seeing prices going up. And it's that immediacy that I think is really driving people in terms of how they're making their choices, as opposed to putting it in a larger big picture of saying that overall the economy is doing fairly well compared to European standards.
Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Professor David Schultz at Hamline University, thank you very much indeed.